Ajay, just indicate to us, okay, when we go live.
We are live.
Okay, thank you. Professor Patnaik, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sneha. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to friends joining from Europe, and greetings to everyone joining us from around the world. I have great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Gilles Scarboner, Vice President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. I may be forgiven, Dr. Carboner, in case the pronunciation of my name, of your name, is not correct. We also have with us Mr. Jean Miscoch, the head of delegation of the ICRC New Delhi, Dr. Umesh Kadam of the ICRC, and of course, Professor Sriram Chaulia, Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs, and Professor Sneha Krishnan, the Assistant Dean of the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability, and all our friends from the partner organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and colleagues from the university, and students and distinguished participants. Once again, greetings to everyone. This is indeed an important partnership as we start with, and we are happy that today we are launching the distinguished lecture series jointly organized by the ICRC and the OP Jindal Global University. We are thankful to Dr. Carboner for agreeing to speak on a very important topic entitled Principle Humanitarian Action, Raising to the Challenge. The timing could not have been more appropriate to implement the partnership between the OP Jindal Global University and the International Committee of the Red Cross, as the world is going through an unprecedented crisis due to the pandemic. This has only further exacerbated the existing challenges of hunger, poverty, armed conflicts, both international and internationalized armed conflicts, and the natural and man-made disasters. It is much needed that we build the capacity of individuals, we sensitize individuals in varied areas of humanitarian studies, and therefore we envisage this partnership will contribute to knowledge development and capacity building. With the human resources and expertise available at the International Committee of the Red Cross and the OP Jindal Global University, I'm confident that we can contribute to the goals of the Memorandum of Understanding between these two organizations for the common good. I'm grateful to the leadership of the OP Jindal Global University, led by the Vice Chancellor, Professor C. Rajkumar, and the leadership of the International Committee of the Red Cross, both in Geneva and the regional headquarters here in New Delhi, for this very important partnership. Just to briefly reflect upon this particular partnership in this region, historically, the International Committee of the Red Cross Regional Delegation for South Asia entered into partnership with the Indian Society of International Law and a few other universities in India and the region. But none of the partnerships so far have been comprehensive that covered aspects in relation to degree awarding programs or joint degree programs like the one that we have envisaged, and aspects in relation to distinguished lecture series. Although the ICRC had a formidable relationship with the Indian Society of International Law and few other bodies, particularly for conducting activities like the International Humanitarian Law, Henry Tuna and Moot Court competition, and few other lecture series. But here we are today having our strong basis in a comprehensive partnership, which envisages as one of its goals a joint master's program in humanitarian studies that covers issues in relation to international law, international relations, and other public policy related matters. And so here we are today looking forward to a fruitful collaboration between the ICRC and the OP Jindal Global University. On this particular note, I also have great pleasure in introducing the university for the sake of our distinguished speaker this afternoon and all our friends who joined us from New Delhi and Geneva, working with the ICRC and other related organizations. The OP Jindal Global University is a non-profit global university established by the government of Haryana and recognized by the University Grants Commission. The university was established as a philanthropic initiative of its founding chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, in memory of his father, Mr. O.P. Jindal. JGU is one of the few universities in Asia that maintains a 1:9 faculty-student ratio and appoints faculty members from India and different parts of the world with outstanding academic qualifications and experience. The university is ranked amongst the top 300 universities in the world in faculty-student ratio and is ranked amongst the top 450 universities in the world in employer reputation. Over 60% faculty have qualifications from leading international universities, and over 45% of all faculty members are alumni of top 200 universities as per the QS and the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. JGU is ranked amongst the top 500 universities in the world in international faculty, which makes up 11% of JGU's total faculty. Our university is a research-intensive university which is deeply committed to its core institutional values of interdisciplinary and innovative pedagogy, pluralism and rigorous scholarship, and globalism and international engagement. JGU has established 12 schools in different areas, and they include the Jindal Global Law School, the Jindal Global Business School, the Jindal School of International Affairs, the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, the School of Journalism and Communication, the School of Art and Architecture, Banking and Finance, the School of Environment and Sustainability, the School of Psychology and Counseling, and most recently we have established the School of Languages and Literature, followed by the School of Public Health and Human Development. In addition to 12 schools at the university, we have 3 research and capacity building institutes, and they are the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, the International Institute for Higher Education Research and Capacity Building, and the Jindal Institute of Leadership Development and Executive Education. The university has over 60 plus interdisciplinary research centers. I'm also happy to share the Ministry of Education, Government of India, recognized the OP Jindal Global University as an institution of eminence. With this status of the university as an institution of eminence, the university has now entered a coveted group of only top 10 public and top 10 private universities in India, among over 1,000 universities to receive the special recognition as an institution of eminence. I'm also pleased to share that we are the first university in the state of Haryana to be recognized as an institution of eminence, which is an incredibly historic recognition for the OP Jindal Global University. JGU has been ranked the #1 private university in India in the QS World University Rankings 2021. And JGU is the only institution of eminence that has significantly moved up in ranking in the QS World University Rankings 2021, and is also the highest ranked Indian university which focuses solely on social sciences, arts, and humanities, and the youngest Indian universities to be ranked this year. The OP Jindal Global University is also the only Indian private university in the top 150 young universities in the world under 50 years of age in the QS Young University Rankings 2021. And JGU has been ranked as a top 500 universities in the QS Graduate Employability Rankings 2022, and is the only non-STEM Indian university and the youngest amongst the Indian institutions ranked in the QS Graduate Employability Rankings 2022. JGU is also among the top 71 institutions in the graduate employment rate and in the rankings of 2022. And recently, we have also received a special recognition from the Times Higher Education Asia for digital innovation. On this particular note, we believe that we are suitably placed towards implementing the partnership between the ICRC and the JGU in all its manifestations, and we look forward to a fruitful collaboration. And I once again welcome our distinguished speaker this afternoon and all our friends and colleagues from the university and the ICRC and related partner organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik. Professor Cholia, over to you.
Hello, greetings everyone. Thank you so much to ICRC for taking this partnership so far. And it's an important moment in this relationship with the ICRC for us as an institution here, that we are hosting someone who's at the senior leadership level of the ICRC to talk to all of us about a problem of shared global concern. I think our registrar mentioned the fact that there are so many crises going on. And indeed, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the whole humanitarian response system is overstretched and has been overwhelmed. And with the cascading crises, one, of course, is the health crisis, but also a lot of the mass displacement and suffering happening due to major so-called civil wars or internal wars. You just read the headlines on a daily basis and you realize what's happening with Afghanistan, the exodus right next door to us here in South Asia is the number one issue, and millions of lives are at stake. And I'm sure Dr. Scarboner and his team are all racking their brains on what to do and how to respond to the severe emergency caused by the regime collapse in Afghanistan. Then we have war, massive war in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. We have a military takeover in Myanmar and longer standing crises that go back to at least 10 years or longer in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. And if you see the data, the outflow, the refugees and the displaced persons are almost 100% correlated with these sustained armed conflicts in these so-called fragile states. But there is also a mass social unrest occurring in other regions of the world due to the pandemic and its long-term impact. And you can see more eruptions and explosions as we go forward. 2022 is not looking like a very happy year by any yardstick. So it's in that kind of a cauldron that we are all caught. And I think the demands on the organizations like the ICRC, the UN system is tremendous, and they are really struggling to meet all these challenges. And it's quite clear that the political situation, the geopolitical situation is likely to worsen as we go forward. We could have a potential crisis in Eastern Europe as well now over Ukraine. So it's quite clear that there is this what used to be called by many people rhetorically as a new world disorder seems to be actually very much happening, in the sense like there is disorder. And the outcome of that is a lot of pressure on the humanitarian actors. And indeed, it's a time where they have to not just meet the material needs, but also try to assist with finding solutions, permanent solutions, peace settlements, and end to conflicts. So some of the roles that have traditionally been assigned to humanitarians are also being blurred, and there is a greater expectation that they should do more. So it's that kind of moment, and we are very fortunate to have Dr. Scarboner himself joining us and talking us through this era of great crisis. I want to just acknowledge the outstanding contributions of two of my colleagues in bringing this lecture series and the degree programs that our registrar mentioned. Professor Sneha Krishnan is, of course, moderating this event, and she is one of our pillars, and also Professor Samrat Sinha, my colleague at the School of International Affairs. These two have been instrumental in working closely with the ICRC partners over almost, I think, a 2-year period, and hammering out a lot of these specifics which have led to this high level of collaboration. So I'm really thankful to my faculty colleagues, and I really hope that the proposed new degree program, as well as this lecture series and joint publications and other such means of cooperation identified in the MOU are all going to fructify and really bring about a new thinking on these pressing matters. We are, I mean, by their very essence, the humanitarians are supposed to be dealing with crises and emergencies. And if not now, when? I mean, we should be promoting deeper study and understanding of these problems now. The world needs it. And we believe that as an academic institution and as a prominent international organization, JGU and ICRC are ideally positioned to come up with some new thinking and shift the paradigms so that we are able to meet these massive expectations falling on our shoulders. So thank you very much. And I dare say I must congratulate ICRC and JGU for entering into something very meaningful and which will actually be of a great consequence to ordinary people and their lives and livelihoods as we go forward. So thank you very much, Dr. Scarboner. Really honored to be hosting you today.
Thank you so much, Professor Cholia. Without further ado, I give the mic now to Dr. Scarboner. Thank you so much for taking your precious time, and look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Krishnan. Esteemed Professor Patnaik, Registrar of Jindal Global University, dear Professor Chaulia, Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs, esteemed colleagues, faculty members, students, ladies and gentlemen. For me, today it is an honor and a true pleasure to open the distinguished lecture series under our new partnership between Jindal Global University and my organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC. And indeed, I'm particularly pleased to see our new partnership come to fruition. And I'm confident that this ICRC-JGU distinguished lecture series will provide an invaluable insights on the many complex crises that the world faces today and that Professor Chaulia alluded to. And it will also provide insights and really a great platform exchange on what to do, on how best to address the mounting humanitarian needs and challenges that we are facing. So our distinguished lecture series will no doubt shed light on key issues related to international humanitarian law, to humanitarian diplomacy, and concrete operational issues. Today, in my inaugural lecture, I will turn to contemporary challenges to principled humanitarian action. After recalling what we mean by principled humanitarian action, I would like to dwell on a few major trends and challenges, and I will highlight how we, the ICRC, seek to address these challenges together with the international movement of the Red Cross and Red Crescent and the wider humanitarian community. I will then focus on a few humanitarian priorities that are of, I think, specific interest to India, including issues related to counterterrorism, to peacekeeping, and to the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. So to start with, what is principled humanitarian action and why is it challenged today? Well, I think it all traces back to the founding of the Red Cross when Henri Dunant found himself in the midst of the Battle of Solferino in Italy 160 years ago. And he was absolutely appalled by the condition of tens of thousands of wounded soldiers who were left agonizing on the battlefield, bereft of any medical assistance. So that's why Henri Dunant decided to create an impartial, neutral, and independent body to assist war victims, war wounded, be they from the rank of the allies or from the ranks of the enemies. And this is how the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Red Cross came into being in 1863 in Geneva. A year later, states adopted the first Geneva Convention, agreeing on legal protection to the wounded in armies in the field. So you see from the very outset, the humanitarian sector was built on three pillars. First, international law with the Geneva Conventions. Second, humanitarian policy with principles that help us navigate the intricacies of working as a humanitarian organization in the midst of war. And third, humanitarian action, providing medical assistance, food assistance, protecting civilians, and so forth. So next to the development of international humanitarian law over the past 160 years, humanitarian principles developed and were codified over time. These fundamental principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence were formally adopted in 1965 at an international conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. So they were also adopted by states who participate as signatory to the Geneva Conventions, to the International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. The first principle is humanity. It's the very essence of what we stand for, which is to save lives, alleviate suffering, and protect human dignity, even in the worst of circumstances in the midst of war. And Professor Chaulia, you were referring to the disorder we are facing in across the world today. And I think that what is this core of humanity is providing somehow of a compass that can help orient, the states in international negotiations and on the international stage towards protecting a minimal core of humanity that must be preserved in any circumstances. Then the principle of impartiality means that we will respond first and foremost to the most intense and pressing needs, regardless of ethnicity, age, political inclinations, and any other criteria. So humanitarian aid is unconditional. And this is what distinguishes humanitarian aid from development assistance, peace mediation, where, of course, conditions with regard to policies and so forth matter. The third principle of neutrality is to refrain from taking sides in the midst of an armed conflict. And this is, I would say, the only way to be able to remain operational and be accepted by all parties to a conflict as a strictly humanitarian organization. And finally, independence. It means to try to work independently from major powers, from states. But actually, what it really means concretely in the field is to manage a whole web of interdependencies in a way to preserve the independence of humanitarian action. And I will come back to this later. So now to the second topic of my lecture, challenges to principled humanitarian action. I will highlight briefly 7 challenges. First, if we look at the world today, armed conflict is ever more protracted, fragmented, and urban, and technological advances are changing the way war are fought. It is changing the means and methods of warfare. So the fact that if you think the Second World War lasted for 6 years, today the major armed conflict in which we are operational have been ongoing for at least a decade, but sometimes They have spanned several generations. Think of Afghanistan, of Yemen, of Iraq, and now Syria, and many other situations now in the Sahel and beyond, where we are witnessing conflict that lasts for very long. They are ever more fragmented. We have identified over 600 armed groups involved in armed conflicts. And this means that if we want to be accepted as an international, independent, neutral, impartial humanitarian organization, we have to make sure that all the armed actors at least would tolerate our presence and activities. And finally, the fact that it is ever more urban means that we have to look at the dramatic impact of explosive, heavy explosive in densely populated area and how we can still provide appropriate protection to civilians in places which are urban centers, and how to protect also critical infrastructure such as water pumping stations, electricity provision systems, and so forth. So it becomes much more sophisticated in a way. It means that we have to engage on the nexus between humanitarian action, development, and peacemaking efforts while preserving our humanitarian space and abiding by humanitarian principles, which raises a whole set of very complex intricacies, but which is possible if things are set right. The second challenge that I want to highlight is that when we look at what my colleagues, we have over 20,000 colleagues working in some 100 countries across the world. And what they witness is increasing vulnerabilities that are exacerbated by the combined impact of climate change and COVID-19 today. Out of the 25 countries that are most exposed to climate change, 14 of these countries are affected by protracted armed conflict. We see ever more often situations of hyper-fragility that develop where people have their coping mechanisms stretched to the limits, while very weak public institutions are simply unable to cope with the tensions that result from greater competition over scarce resources, from the social and economic fallouts of the pandemics, and the impact of climate change. So the conclusion is that no one can respond and address the mounting needs that we face alone, and partnerships has become of the essence. Partnerships between humanitarian organizations, development actors, the private sector, and other important stakeholders. And partnership means also starting from within the communities and equipping and starting to support communities in being more resilient and having more capacities to deal with the stress they are facing. The third challenge, and I think Professor Chawla, you alluded to it, is a return of big power politics and major geostrategic tensions between blocs. And we see that what was something of the past, what we call international armed conflicts, we can see that the risk of a return of major international armed conflicts becomes more likely. But we see also an increase of so-called partnered operations, whereby states intervene more often indirectly in non-international armed conflicts, be it by supporting proxies, by training and equipping parties to the conflict, or by transferring weapons and providing intelligence and the likes. So as such, there is a risk of dissolution of responsibilities and accountability under international humanitarian law. And for us, as a neutral, independent, and impartial humanitarian organization, it is key to engage all states that support directly or indirectly parties to armed conflict in order to encourage them to exert a positive influence in securing greater compliance with international humanitarian law, by the very parties involved in armed conflict. And we have launched a state relationship initiative with very concrete and practical recommendations on how states that have indirect relations with parties to the conflict can actually exert such positive influence. The fourth challenge I want to highlight is digital transformation. Digital transformation goes way beyond technical issues. It's a game changer on the way wars are fought, and it's a game changer on the way we, as a humanitarian organization, operate in the field. It gives rise to new means and methods of warfare, such as autonomous weapon systems powered by AI and machine learning, cyber warfare, cyber attacks in the context of conflict, outer space confrontation, etc. So fundamental principles and provisions of international humanitarian law do apply. But in some instances, international humanitarian law, or IHL, must be further developed, adapted, and interpreted in a way to provide adequate protections in the face of these new means and methods of warfare. And this is an engagement in diplomatic cycle, which is absolutely, and diplomatic processes, which is key. On the other hand, specific advances in science and technology provide huge potential to change and improve the effectiveness of humanitarian action, not least as communities affected by armed conflict are ever more connected and equipped digitally. I'm just back from the northern part of Nigeria. I came back a few days ago, and I was, as an example, quite struck by an initiative that was taken to provide all primary healthcare centers and health workers in Adamawa State, in the northeast of Nigeria, with tablets powered by artificial intelligence that help health workers diagnose infant diseases. And through these diagnostic tools, after 4 years, they have seen that they could reduce dramatically infant mortality, but at the same time reduce the intake of antibiotics. And they are so proud of the results that Adamawa State now is the health authorities are seeking to show to other states in Nigeria how to use it for the benefit of better diagnostics of infant diseases. And this tablet, we have produced it together with the Swiss Institute of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. And it's a work in progress, and it's being now expanded as an option in Somalia and possibly also in Afghanistan. So it's just to show you one example among so many of using new technologies to improve the effectiveness of what we do. A major concern when it comes to the digital transformation is also the question of data, protecting private data. The risk of cyber attacks on sensitive data handled by the ICRC, for instance, when it comes to our visits to detainees and prisoners of war, when it comes to all the work that we do to try to identify the fate of the missing in armed conflict, is real. Last month, we at the ICRC, we had realized that one of our major data centers had suffered data breach. This has put the information handled by our central tracing agency on people who have gone missing and their families at risk. And this is a huge responsibility, as now we are turning to the 500,000, about 515,000 people whose data may have been breached. So this is to say that no one is immune from highly sophisticated attacks on systems, and that this is an area where we have to engage much more, even if we, the ICRC, have been taken the lead years ago to work on that topic. Let me move to the fifth challenges. We have engaged on the Triple Nexus, the so-called Triple Nexus between humanitarian action, development, and peace. The international community rightly wants to see progress on all three fronts at the same time. And I think that while principled humanitarian action can contribute to create and establish an enabling environment for peace talks, or it can contribute to preserve previous development gains during armed conflicts, the Triple Nexus approach raises specific challenges for strictly neutral, impartial, and independent humanitarian action. For instance, humanitarian action must be granted to the most vulnerable in need without pre-ex-ante conditions, contrary to development assistance and cooperation. And peace building is obviously a highly political process that can run counter to the required neutrality and independence of humanitarian organization. So there is ample room for much greater synergy, but new modalities must be explored to preserve principled humanitarian action and the space for impartial humanitarian organization to operate while engaging more on the Triple Nexus. The sixth challenge is that I think we have also to take a closer look at the political economy of armed conflict. We see a greater blurring of boundaries and lines between economic and criminal activities in armed conflicts and I would say political struggles that we were used to. Armed groups tend to resort in some instances to kidnap and ransom activities. They seek to embed humanitarian action within war economy dynamics. And this raises, on the one hand, security challenges, but it calls also to rethink principled humanitarian action in such context. And this is an area where we have also been working quite intensively together with researchers and some academics who have been doing research on the topic. And the final and seventh challenge I want to address is that to ensure the proper financing of humanitarian action, we see that a growing share of humanitarian funding tends to be earmarked to specific crises and to activities that are aligned with the foreign policy interests of donors. While there might be nothing wrong with it, it is key to preserve humanitarian space and financing for responding in an impartial manner to the most pressing and intense needs. So we have to diversify funding sources, including via the establishment of new financing models that can help mobilize new types of investors. So now let me turn to the third and last part of my presentation, which is some specific issues of interest to India. And I think some of these interests were made clear by India during its current two-year term as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, and in particular during Indian presidency of the UN Security Council last August. So I will address very quickly COVID-19 pandemic, counterterrorism, peacekeeping operations, and Afghanistan. We, the International Committee of the Red Cross, will commend and welcome India's continuous engagement for greater vaccine equity when it comes to the response to the pandemic. India has indeed made remarkable contributions globally when it comes to providing COVID-19 vaccines, critical medicines, and teams of experts to respond to the needs, including by making vaccines available to UN peacekeepers and health workers worldwide. We need more countries to join in and support efforts and call for equitable access to vaccines. Our ICRC teams, they work in particular to ensure that vaccines and essential medicines and material reach people in the most hard to reach and remote areas, not least in detention places and in camps where you have displaced people. These are typically places that are overcrowded and where social distancing, hand washing, and basic services are not readily available, and they must be serviced as a matter of priority. With regard to counterterrorism and sanctions in particular, for the sake of time, I will just zoom in on economic sanctions, which target designated non-state and state actors. Over the past decades, we have seen a multiplication of sanction regimes. These sanctions de facto restrict the ability of humanitarian organizations to provide life-saving assistance to vulnerable children, women, and men in sanctioned jurisdictions. This applies all the way from Myanmar to Yemen via Afghanistan, Syria, and many others. For us, as a principled humanitarian organization, we know that it is indeed possible to strike a proper balance between the legitimate security concerns of states that translate in a range of counterterrorism measures and state obligations and responsibilities under international humanitarian law. And we, the ICRC, we stand always ready to share our expertise and work with states towards achieving this balance between legitimate security concerns and the imperative of humanity. For us, it is also crucial to see adequate humanitarian exemptions and carve-outs so that in sanction regimes, so that impartial humanitarian aid can reach people in need. Such exemptions must enable us not only to bring vital goods and services, but they must also enable to pay salaries to our own staff, as well as to purchase goods and services. What we see is that suppliers often remain reluctant to sell goods and services as a result of so-called chilling effects of sanctions. And financial service providers shy away from offering financial transaction options as a result of over-compliance, and salary payments, for instance, can become a real obstacle. A case in point is Afghanistan today, and I come back to Afghanistan in a few minutes. Let me just underline that India keeps playing a critical role on the global stage in relation to issues of counterterrorism, for example, as chair of UN sanctions committees. For the ICRC, it is rejoicing that last July, India's Foreign Secretary stated at a briefing at the UN Security Council on the protection of civilians in armed conflicts that India remains committed to preserving principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence in responding to all humanitarian situations. He further reiterated the call to respect international humanitarian law and humanitarian principles, stating that India remains committed to working with the international community to address global humanitarian challenge in an effective and comprehensive manner. Now, let me allow just a few words on peacekeeping operations. Out of the 1 million troops deployed under UN peacekeeping operations, a quarter of them have been provided by India. In addition, India is making a great push to equip peacekeeping operations with top-notch technologies that can render peacekeeping operations more effective. On the ICRC side, we have regular interactions with peacekeeping forces in the field, but also in capitals, in particular with regards to international humanitarian law training and promotion. Our regional delegation in India has a long-standing partnership with New Delhi's Center for UN Peacekeeping. We have routinely held training sessions with Indian peacekeepers, focusing on the legal framework applicable and the prevalent situation on the ground prior to peacekeeping troop deployment. Finally, let me conclude with a few words on Afghanistan. We have been operational in Afghanistan for the past 4 decades, non-stop. At present day, we have over 1,800 staff working primarily to provide vital health services and protecting the most vulnerable. We have decided to take over the support of some 20 hospitals across the country, and we have been able to import drugs and material and to pay the salaries of our staff. In addition to that, we have seen that the doctors, nurses, midwives, and other health workers in the hospitals had not been paid, had not received any salary since last August. So we just resumed the payment of such salaries to the thousands and thousands of staff running these hospitals, as this is a precondition for health services to be provided to Afghans in needs. Paying the salary of non-security essential public servants is key, but it won't be enough to avert a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. It is urgent to allow for liquidity to circulate in the Afghan economy so that Afghans can generate an income and can buy food and other essential goods. Over half of the population is severely food insecure, and the situation worsens by the day. We are aware that India has been providing direct assistance to the vulnerable in Afghanistan and has supported the global humanitarian response. At a recent UN Security Council meeting on Afghanistan, India reiterated its commitments to humanitarian aid for Afghanistan. And let me quote the Indian envoy to the UN, T.S. Tirumurti, who said the humanitarian assistance should be based on the principle of neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And disbursement of the aid should be non-discriminatory and accessible to all, irrespective of ethnicity, religion, or political belief, and should reach the most vulnerable first, including women, children, and minorities. This is exactly what principled humanitarian action stands for, and we have to find ad hoc solutions to buy time for Afghans to be able so that they are able to survive and go through the winter. It is imperative in the short run that a longer-term political solution must be found if we wish to see the next generation of Afghans enjoying peace and greater stability. So, distinguished colleagues, faculty members, students, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, let me say again how glad I am to see the partnership with JGU develop so well. An important aspect of this partnership will revolve around the introduction of a master's program in humanitarian action and policy. And Professor Patnaik, you did refer to this important new initiative. And such master programs can be found in several Western countries, but I think that it is the first of its kind in the global South. And we very much look forward to launching this program with you, to supporting this program that you launch next year. Finally, let me wish you every success to the distinguished lecture series that we inaugurate today. And we hope with these quarterly lectures and further cooperation that both our institutions will make a collective contribution to promoting global international humanitarian law and policy debates in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Giles. A big round of applause from everyone who's joining us on Zoom and on YouTube. I think I have a lot of questions. I'm sure many of our speakers, those who've been listening, and our speakers will also want to intervene at some point. I will quickly take a couple that have already been flagged up, and I would also invite anyone, if they want to unmute and speak, you're welcome to. The first question is around an issue that has been central to recent debates on humanitarian reform and the future of humanitarian action is the localization of aid. We've all come across these debates. This issue is also at the heart of grand bargain. Can you kindly tell us your views about this?
Yes, Sneha, this is an excellent question. Indeed, the grand bargain that has been adopted at the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016 in Istanbul is very ambitious on the localization of aid, meaning that aid should be as local as possible and as international as necessary. And the objective was to try to devote by 2020 25% of global humanitarian finance as directly as possible to local, national, regional responders. We are far from it, and progress has been very slow. As far as we are concerned, the International Committee of the Red Cross, our primary partner are the 192 national societies of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, like the Indian Red Cross or the Afghan Red Crescent, etc. And we do work systematically to all the extent possible with national societies. And I was telling you, I was just back from Nigeria, and it is remarkable in Nigeria that across all communities throughout this country, which is almost, but not exactly as big as India, you find local chapters with volunteers of the Red Cross present. So it is really by equipping, strengthening their capabilities, working with them, that we try to have a local, to localize the response as much as we can. That said, if you look at Afghanistan and other places where the conflict is extremely acute, sometimes local responders face constraints in terms of acceptance, security, and capabilities. And in these circumstances, the ICRC, we play a role as a guardian of international humanitarian law and as a body that is able to work with all sides being respected or at least accepted or tolerated by all sides. I was last fall in several countries in the Caucasus, in Southern Caucasus. And there, of course, the ICRC, we are able to work on all sides, regardless of controversies over the sovereignty of states over certain territories. And of course, it is difficult for national actors or local actors to be able to work cross-line the same way. So in a nutshell, what we try to find is the best complementarities between local actors and international ones, bringing each of us our value added, but the trend is clear. We have to do a much better job in working with, through, and actually developing the capabilities of local responders.
Thank you so much. I think the time doesn't do justice to the extent of which we can take the discussion. A couple more questions. Megha asks, generally the humanitarian space and debates are mostly dominated by Western actors. Do you believe countries of the global South, especially India, can play a bigger role within these dialogues? Additionally, how do you think this will affect the various humanitarian challenges that you have lined out? Thank you.
I think it is key, and it will happen. We see greater, well, if I look at our engagement in terms of humanitarian diplomacy, we have engaged over the past decade or so much more forcefully with a much greater number of key players, regional powers, global emerging powers, and it is absolutely crucial to engage with all actors. Now we see that different, emerging economies and powers are intervening with possibly, a different version of or different vision of how humanitarian action should be framed. we see more and more direct state-to-state humanitarian assistance. This is fine, but in some instances where you have a non-international armed conflict and where the state de facto does not have full control over its territory and its population, of course, this raises some question with regard to the impartiality of humanitarian assistance, which should, as I mentioned, address the most pressing needs. And concretely, I told you that we have identified about 600 armed groups operational in armed conflict, but this means that we have also calculated that roughly 150, 160 million people live in territories that de facto are not under the permanent or not under the control at all of states. And these 160 million people are people affected by the COVID-19 pandemics. They are primarily, half of them or even more are children, and we have to be able to somehow reach out to them. So this raises again an issue on how we think, engage, and go about impartial, independent humanitarian action that is acceptable but done in a professional manner. That said, in this context, it is key to keep engaging for us with India, with China, with, as I mentioned, Nigeria, South Africa, and so many other regional and global players. And I'm convinced that India, as we see it, is stepping up its game also in terms of humanitarian action. And it is, I think we have to learn in a reciprocal manner. We are really very much keen to better learn and understand how India sees its own role and policies in the humanitarian sector, as much as we are at the disposal of the Indian authorities and also working a lot with the Indian Red Cross, of course, in order to support and provide some of the expertise or value added that we might bring to the table.
Thank you. There are a couple more questions and we have 5 more minutes. So I'll combine them and you can respond to them all together. One question is, you spoke of the principles of humanitarian action and specified neutrality. And having been practitioner myself, I understand how challenging it is. Can you please elaborate on whether you think it's possible for humanitarians to stay neutral in the face of injustice or genocide or conflict and war? The other question is, what is ICRC's position on the triple nexus between development, humanitarian, and peacekeeping operations? You mentioned it, but if you can possibly elaborate on that. Dr. Umesh is also asking a question. He's saying, increasingly, the military is getting engaged in humanitarian action in many contexts. Sometimes humanitarian agencies have to work closely with the military due to security concerns. Do you think it is possible to ensure respect to the fundamental humanitarian principles in such situations? I can see there is a thread in all these questions. So if you can give a response to all 3 of them.
Yeah. I will try to be short because I realize we have 5 minutes. So your question on genocide, let me say that with the International Committee of the Red Cross, our modus operandi is constructive, confidential engagement with those actors that are directly responsible for, be it violations of international humanitarian law or for humanitarian issues that we witness on the ground. So we engage with armed forces, security forces, but also armed groups on promoting international humanitarian law, promoting humanitarian principles, so that actually the duty bearers respect their obligations. That said, in an extreme case as the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, there is no more confidential engagements to be conducted with anyone. The only thing that we did in Kigali when we remained in 1994, but could see that a full-fledged genocide was ongoing, was to reach out to the international community and to shout and say, there is a genocide going on. It's absolutely dramatic. You must do something. And then we kept a few surgical and medical teams in order to try on the spot to save a few lives that we could save. So you see, there is a limit whereby we maintain our confidential privileged dialogue, especially with states, of course. But in an extreme case, such as the genocide in 1994 in Rwanda, there is a limit to what confidential dialogue can achieve. And then, we have a very clear policy, a doctrine that is, by the way, available. We have a public version of our doctrine when it comes to these different démarches that we do and when and why we, speak out. On the question of the Triple Nexus, our policy, I would say, is to engage much more on a pragmatic manner. There is a lot of conversation on the Triple Nexus in salons and conferences, but actually where it matters is on the ground. So what we have done, for instance, is to take some of our donors who were questioning, but what you do, is it development? Is it humanitarian? Say, okay, let's go together to Mali, to Niger, to Chad, and let's see on the ground concretely what we do and what you have been supporting in terms of development for decades and what you can do now in the Nexus. And when we ground the conversation on field reality, all these complications or complexities become very simple. It's a question of how can we all bring the value added we have, and how can we still maintain and preserve a humanitarian space where humanitarians are able to work even in the midst of hostilities, while contributing to efforts geared at development and peace building. Finally, working closely with the military, yes, we do work very closely with the militaries all over the world, especially in our role and mandate as a guardian and promoter of international humanitarian law. When it comes to humanitarian assistance, you are right, especially in the case of so-called natural disasters. The military have logistical capacities to bring immediate assistance to the people affected, and that's fine. When it comes to armed conflicts, often the military happens to be one party to the conflict. So they may provide assistance to the population, and this is their own dealings, but we see that we have to distantiate ourselves from such humanitarian assistance, because indeed, as a principled humanitarian organization, we have to remain a credible, neutral intermediary accepted by all sides. And if we are embedded in the humanitarian response of the military that is a party to a conflict, then of course we lose that credibility, that acceptance that is key for us to operate, because we operate without any armed escort. We operate without any hard security. The only protection that we have is our flag, and we have to be tolerated, at least, if possible, accepted by all sides. So these are, in a nutshell, my responses.
I'll take one more comment. I had a question, and I also want to invite Professor Cholia and Professor Patnaik if they had some really immediate comments. So let me just take this one final question and add mine. I had one more question, says Aditi. You spoke about the Triple Nexus, but has the Nexus really worked, given that conflicts are lasting for more than 40 decades and there is almost very little development in these contexts? My reflection, based on your discussion and ICRC's interest in climate change and refugees, given crisis is caused by climate change, is also led through conflicts. The case of Bangladesh, Myanmar refugees now living in Bangladesh. What is the framework in which ICRC is carrying out operations within climate change, conflict, disasters? That is my question.
Excellent question. Thank you, Sneha. Thank you for pushing me a bit on the nexus. So let me be more concrete and practical. You see, we do intervene in Libya, in Syria, and in many other, well, in Nigeria, as I was mentioning. We maintain and upgrade and repair major water pumping stations, and we ensure that electricity provision is granted so that we can operate, theaters, surgical theaters in hospitals, that hospitals don't suffer from electricity cuts, that water pumping stations are up and running, and so forth. What we do is mainly maintenance of wastewater treatment plant in Benghazi, etc. But we see that after a while, we go to the limit of what maintenance can achieve, especially because often in these cities, you have a lot of displaced people that arrive and you have, sprawling population. You need to upgrade the systems. But in these places, development actors are either absent, or they are too wary of risks, or these are jurisdictions under sanctions where any development investment is out of question for major donors, including, by the way, the international financial institutions. So we have advocated, for instance, in the case of Syria, that we have launched a campaign saying some of the fundamental critical infrastructure is too big to fail for the millions of people it is serving. So we need to go a bit to what we might call early rehabilitation or early recovery in order to upgrade this infrastructure. In Goma, and I will finish with that, what we do is much more, I think, good in terms of nexus. We see Goma growing, and we know how the water system works. And we see that for a whole new quarter, we need to build a new water provision systems. We have invested 15 million, but the project, the master plan for Goma City is much greater. It's above 40 million USD. So we have brought the World Bank, the Agence Française de Développement, the Africa Development Bank, and through a package, we bring the knowledge of the water system. We bring some of the money that is immediately needed to expand the systems to avoid a full-fledged cholera outbreak in a quarter where you have a lot of population. But at the same time, we help build a brand new master plan that will service Goma for the decades to come. And we bring development finance and development actors in the DRC, in the east of the DRC, to do this with us. And I think these type of models are absolutely critical, and we want to do much more of it. Now, with regard to peace building, you see one example. About 16 or 15 months ago, we intervened in Yemen as a neutral intermediary, as a neutral humanitarian intermediary to facilitate the simultaneous release of over 1,000 detainees. By doing so, we think that we contribute to providing an enabling environment where sides discuss about how to restitute dead bodies across lines so that families can have a dignified burial of their loved ones, how we can facilitate the simultaneous release of detainees across lines. And this is then up to the actors concerned and the international community to try on this basis of an enabling environment to move on with peace building efforts. We are not engaged in peace mediation. This is not our role, but I think this is a contribution. So concretely, this is a bit how the nexus can work, but you have to really look at specific situations and move beyond administrative silos that have been inherited from the past and that are more a problem than a solution.
Thank you so much. I admire your ability to pack so much of a response within the short time that we've had. I would like to just briefly invite Professor Patnaik, Professor Cholia, and also Professor Samrat Sinha, who's also joined us today, if they have any final thoughts, if they want to respond or find synergies between what JGU and ICRC partnership would mean for us. And then I'll hand over to Jan for the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Sneha. First of all, I am so grateful to our distinguished guest this afternoon for such a comprehensive lecture on an area which is not easy to handle with so many debates and interpretations going on between what the global South needs to do and what the other developed countries are doing on matters in relation to humanitarian aid and assistance. And the entire interpretation of the meaning of the term aid and assistance is also subject to a great debate. So I hope that this particular lecture this afternoon will lay the foundations for a greater understanding. But I'm sure that we will not be in a position to find solutions to worldly problems. But all we need to do is to have varied interpretations to bring in the much needed synergies, as rightly pointed out by Sneha. So on this particular note, also alluding to one of the aspects referred to Dr. Scarboner this afternoon, I would like to mention that this is a historic development when we are talking about introduction of a joint master's in humanitarian studies from the global South, because one of the impressions or the perceptions that even people carry about the ICRC is it's probably an organization dominated by the Europeans, which probably not the case in all its entirety. But today we have an opportunity to sort of change these perceptions. And as I mentioned, even at the beginning of my remarks, we can come together to convene this program and administer this program from perspectives of different disciplines. So it's a great beginning, and I'm so thankful to the entire leadership of the ICRC and the JSIA. And on this particular note, I would also like to thank Professor Sriram Chaulia, Professor Sneha Krishnan, and Professor Samrat Sinha, and other colleagues from the regional delegation for South Asia for working tirelessly to make this partnership a success. I know that we have a long way ahead, but considering that it's a comprehensive partnership, we need to do, and we need to start off with a beginning somewhere, and today is the real beginning, and we hope to work on these and other related issues from diverse perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sriram?
Thank you so much, Dr. Scarboner. I think you covered a lot of ground, and one of the statistics you mentioned stood out for me, the correlation between climate and armed conflicts. I mean, you said 14 out of 25 or something like that, and that is really striking. It looks like that is going to be the trend of the future. We may even have 100% correlation between climate-induced drought or extreme weather conditions and so-called ethnic conflicts or civil wars. So I think in the past, we had, the humanitarian studies were more focused on political understanding of situations. But clearly now the environmental aspects have come in a big way. And there's just no way we can divide these into silos anymore. The more these trends intensify. So, and it's, you can see Professor Sneha Krishnan is from our School of Environmental Studies, and some of us are from the political science backgrounds. So I'm sure that the new master's degree program, which we intend to launch in 2023, will bring in these interdisciplinary aspects and will really highlight these pressing problems from all the relevant angles. Because if we are keeping the environmental studies out and doing the old way of studying humanitarian problems only through law and political science, I think we are going to be missing a lot. So I'm really grateful that Sneha is leading this, and I'm very, very hopeful that this program will really make a real difference for people's lives, and of course to advancing knowledge. So thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing this.
I think this is the toughest job, Jan. Over to you for vote of thanks. You're still on mute, yeah.
Yes, I think that now you can hear me, I hope. Professor Patnaik, Registrar, Jindal Global University, Professor Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, Professor Krishna, Dr. Gilles Garbonnier, Vice President ICRC, dear distinguished participants, I have the honor to conclude this session. And please let me first thank our partner, the OP Jindal Global University, for helping us organize this inaugural lecture of the distinguished lecture series. And special thanks to my ICRC colleague and ICRC Vice President, Dr. Gilles Carbonnier, for wonderfully delivering it, setting the tone for the rest of the series. As it was already mentioned, one of the mandates of the ICRC is to promote awareness of and respect for the international humanitarian law. The work with academia plays an important role in this endeavor, as it allows us to reach out to the generation of future leaders who will one day be at the forefront of shaping important policies. It also provides platforms to table and discuss global issues and thematics of humanitarian importance, not only among the academics, but also by involving practitioners, including those who contribute to setting the policies of today. We believe that India, with its long history of humanitarianism and given its position of regional and emerging global power, is in an excellent position to play a very positive role in supporting these important debates and in promoting global response to issues of humanitarian concern. And some of those have been already mentioned today by my colleague, Gilles Carbonnier, such as the promotion of equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines, or the India's involvement in peacekeeping operations. With this in mind, we entered last year in partnership with Jindal Global University to take forward the promotion, awareness raising, development, teaching, and research in the areas of international humanitarian law, humanitarian policy, and action. And as it was also mentioned by several speakers, an important aspect of this partnership is the introduction of a master's program in humanitarian action and policy. And we really look forward to launching this program next year. Today's inaugural lecture in this distinguished lecture series was the first in a regular series of lectures delivered quarterly. Subsequent lectures will focus more on regional and local issues. However, this program is only one facet of the wide-ranging collaboration. Future conferences, seminars, and joint research projects are initiatives that we hope to explore within the framework of this partnership. Through this collaboration, both our institutions are keen on bringing global humanitarian law and policy-related debates and discussions to the table in India. Thank you once more for being here. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you soon again for the rest of the series. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sneha.
I'm really out of words. I think we need some time to process everything that's been discussed here today. I think there'll be more ideas and more events that we would like to jointly co-create and learn from each other. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. That's it from our end.